And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Now tonight represents a little bit of a departure from us. This is a brand new show that we're going to experiment with tonight. We're calling it Coalition Radio After Dark. What that means is the conversation is going to be a little bit more mature. We're sensitive subjects, not safe for work, not safe for kiddos. So, we're going to be posting this under private. And again, we're not shouting out to the Facebook universe right now because of their restrictions, if you will, on anything related to be adult entertainment. Even if it's just like tonight, it's just going to be a conversation. We're also going to be on the Twitter. We are broadcasting live on Periscope right now, and we put out links to that on the Facebook. So with that in mind, I'd like to reintroduce to the Coalition audience Jessie Sage. Jessie, welcome back to the Coalition.
Thanks for having me back.
So let's talk a little bit. You were on just a few short weeks ago, and the conversation tonight is going to be geared more towards, again, people's actual physical interactions, the kind of conversations they have, not even really touching on the politics of it. I think we've well established in the conversations that we've had online how that we feel that, as the hashtag says, sex work is work. We need a political angle to repeal terrible legislation like FOSTA and SESTA. We need to completely rethink society's attitudes towards sex work. As a libertarian, I always like to point out that I'm proud that we're the only national political party with an active plank supporting sex workers. And that's been no more true than as we find ourselves right now in the COVID-19. But with that in mind, that isn't past us. That's just going to run parallel, if you will, to our conversation here. Because I think folks need to understand a little bit more about the sex work industry, how it works, the various perspectives on it, not just the relentless political. I mean, let's have some fun conversation tonight. I mean, for God's sake, we all need it. And maybe you're going to help us give a little roadmap tonight, if you will, so that folks who are, cooped up at home alone, folks who are, with their partner, hopefully, or folks who have chosen just an alternative lifestyle can explore and find new things out there in the culture. Tell us a little bit about your background, if you will, on your artistic and professional side. What type of efforts are you involved in?
So I am a phone sex operator. I also do audio smut, so I make audio recordings of erotic stories. I am a maker, so I also make short porn clips, and I do texting and all sorts of like internet girlfriend experience sort of things. And I'm a writer.
Right, and you're a little bit in hiatus right now, but we're having conversations about that. You've got your own podcast as well as a weekly column, and just give folks a sort of, like I said, an introduction to that.
Yeah, so I do have a podcast. It's called the Peep Show Podcast, and I run it with my partner, and we focus on news and stories from the sex industry. So we bring on people who work in all sectors of the sex industry, but also sex positive people. We talk a lot about the politics, like you said, but I do think it's important to also talk about why we do this work in the first place and not just the politics of it. So we do that. And then I also have a column at the Pittsburgh City Paper where I talk about sex and issues related to sex and sex work. And but that's also on a little bit of a hiatus because of COVID-19. So when all of the businesses shut down, my paper that I write for got lost 90% of its advertisers. So my column is temporarily furloughed until businesses open back up again, which is really a shame.
Right. And here's the sort of tragedy behind that. Alternate newspapers for years. I mean, I grew up reading the Village Voice for all sorts of reasons. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just one of the grandparents, if you will, of alternate weekly newspapers, and they served a lot of purposes. Art, music, culture, primarily politics, really charged politics, free speech issues, sexuality. And particularly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, everything from the gay rights movement, Stonewall, forward to the HIV crisis. Independent media has always played a seminal role in that, and even to this day has done so because they keep apprised, for example, of the Me Too movement, of any one of a number of issues that are highly charged. The challenge has been that they've always relied on lifestyle entertainment and for advertising, and it costs money to do this, and people need to be paid for their efforts, and it's not just an open swingers party out there where people are just throwing stuff together. You're talking about people who are professional writers like yourself. You come from a very, not only are you immersed in sexual productions, but you come from a very strong writing background. You're an academic, and you're a writer's writer. So it's really that's why I love talking to you, because you're this Renaissance woman, this unique reflection on every part of the story. So in the dearth of that,
I mean, I think sorry, I was going to say, it's unfortunate because it's strange. The idea of having an all weekly with no sex column is really sad.
Right. Because that's one of the few pleasures left to us at this point, not only just on a physical level, but just the engagement that happens with our partner or partners. So on top of everything else, we're denied these few creature comforts because of this moment we are in history. So we're going to take a swing and actually, for lack of a better term, sorry, but we're going to take a swing every week at kind of bringing that to you here through Jessie's experiences, and we're going to evolve and see in what manner can independent media provide, the new independent media, if you will. I mean, think about it. Alt weeklies were really the first independent media. They were the parents of all this. So I just want to give that as a backdrop to what we're trying to accomplish here. Have a little fun, have some conversation. Some of it can be serious, but serious in the pursuit of fun. So there you have. Out of all the things that you do, what do you like the most, and what do you look forward to the most?
Besides writing, because I think I'm primarily a writer, but besides that, in terms of the performances and the sex work, I actually love phone sex. That's my favorite. And that's my favorite because it's very interactive and it's very creative. And the fact that you aren't looking at the person that you're talking to also means that people create these really imaginative play spaces, and they're very open about what they want in ways that I think people are afraid to be in other venues. And it's a improvisation between two people, and I think that can be really exciting and also really beautiful and really intimate, and it's my favorite thing to do. I like the one-on-one aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Give us a sense of how it all works. Just lay out a roadmap, from start to finish, if you will.
Of how phone sex works.
Yeah, where do you go for it? What are the limits? What are the topics? What are the costs? How if folks, particularly those sort of alone right now because of this. If they wanted to call you or someone else, a variety of backgrounds or interests, if you will, because it really spans the gamut. Where do you start? How does it happen?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different sites. I think that the biggest site for phone sex for a long time has been Night Flirt, NITE Flirt, so nightflirt.com. And most people who do phone sex have an ad on there. And it's very different than how phone sex used to be, where everybody would sit in a call center and an operator would just dispatch you. Right now, the way it works is that people are working from home and they put up their own ads that I, for example, have ads that are that reflect the things that I'm interested in. So I have one that's kind of academic-y for people who want to call me and talk about religion or philosophy. And there is actually a lot of people who want to do that. And then I have, a tattooed curvy MILF one. And, there's different ads that I have that attract different sorts of customers. And that's generally what people do is it's all categorized. So if you are somebody who's really into taboo fetishes, or if you're into BDSM, or if you're a couple and you want people to call you and your partner, or if I'm trying to think of all the categories. There's so many, but you basically place ads in certain fetish categories, and people who want to talk to somebody who, for example, will talk to them about their religious upbringing would look for my ad and call me. Or if they are really into MILFs, they might also find me.
Well,
There's
but by the way, you have to define the acronyms. Assume that we're basically, you're giving a course in phone sex 101.
Oh, well, you want me to define MILF?
Well, yeah, all of them actually. Because there's there's this incredible storm of acronyms that folks. I mean, particularly if you're a little older, we're still confused on the he, him, her. Is we're starting from scratch here. Okay, so feel free.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I used a couple of different acronyms. So a MILF is a mom I'd like to fuck. So that's just older women. So I'm an older woman. So if people are interested in that, they could call me for that. If you're interested in role play, for example, there's people who place role play ads. There's ignore lines, because there's some people who like to just be humiliated by being ignored. So you might look for that. If you're into other sorts of humiliation, you might look for somebody who specializes in that. So you can really go on there in the same way that you would go on to any like porn site and search under different categories and find somebody who will talk to you about the sort of things that you want to talk about. And one of the interesting things I think about phone sex is that customers come at it from a lot of different perspectives. So some just want somebody to keep them company, and they're looking for somebody that they think they can relate to, that they can chat with. Some people have fantasies like cuckold fantasies, for example. So cuckolding is when you want somebody else to sleep with your wife and you want to watch or participate in it somehow. So somebody who feels like they're interested in that but can't really realize that in their real life may call a phone sex operator that specializes in that. A lot of us are generalists and I'll talk about whatever somebody wants to talk about within reason. I have some things that I won't talk about. There's things that we're not allowed to talk about on our site. So we're not supposed to do any underage things. I don't think we're supposed to. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that we're not allowed to do. So people they pick somebody that they want to call. We set our own prices. So also they'll look and see, oh, this person is $2 a minute. This person is $3 a minute. So I might, whatever their budget is. And they can just call whoever is, happens to be online. On these platforms too, there's also the texting function. So if I don't happen to have my lines on, but somebody wants to talk to me, they can message me and ask, when I'm going to be on. People can talk for as long as they want to talk. So some people call and they're done in 5 minutes, and some people want to talk for 2 hours. So it just kind of depends on where they are and what they want to do.
Now,
the people. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
In this case, what's interesting to me, and this is really not a political statement per se, although it is, but at the same time, it's a if you will, an explanation of the psychology involved. You very much control the field of play, don't you? I mean, again, you spell out in some way your limitations. Is that part of the ad? How does that work? You obviously have areas you're comfortable in, areas you're not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't necessarily spell all of that out in my ads. I try to use my ads to give a flavor for my personality and to see if somebody would click with that or not. I tend to lay out limits within conversations, and those have changed over time. There are things that I didn't understand when I first started the job that I now do understand and will do. So yeah, I think that you co-create with the person that you're talking about, whatever they're coming to you with and whatever you're comfortable with. And the sort of negotiations that take place happen, usually, for me at least, I should say, I can only talk about how I work, happen within the conversations that we have.
What type of cost is involved? I mean, is it a range of prices, or what can folks expect to spend on something like this?
I would say right now the average is between, on the lower end, it's usually the average price is $1.99 a minute on the site that I work on. The lower end, some people are charging 99 cents to $1.50, but that's not as common. And then they usually go up to $3 or $4 a minute.
Okay, so in a sense, you're the artist. Do you control the conversation, or how do you establish that sort of not so much as a rules, but how do you establish where this is going to go? Do you have a conversation with someone ahead of time, or is that part of it? Is that or is that do people call in expecting you just to magically know?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they do. I think that I actually ask a ton of questions, but I'm kind of a curious person. So I'll ask people, it kind of depends on how they start. So every once in a while, I'll have people that start and it sounds like they're already masturbating, and they'll say like, oh, I'm really turned on right now. And usually if they're doing that, I'll ask them, what are you thinking about? And sometimes they'll say, I'm watching porn and I wanted somebody to join this experience with me. And if that's the case, I'll ask them what they're watching, because I want to get a sense of like what turns them on and what their fantasies are. And then if they say, oh, I'm watching a male female threesome, then I'll create a fantasy about that, because I know that's something that turns them on. That's not how most of my calls go, though. Often they'll just call and say, hi, I'm Jeff and I live in Minnesota, and I'm bored tonight. And then I'll ask them a little bit about their lives, and I'll ask them if they've called lines before, and what their experiences have been like. And usually if I start to ask what their experiences have been like, I'll get a sense of what they're looking for. So sometimes people really want a role play. So they'll say, oh, I really liked it when I called somebody and, they pretended to be my secretary, or they were into femdom and I got to worship their bodies. And so whatever it is that they say that they like, I'll tend to try to go down that path. Some people don't necessarily want that, and they just want to chat, and then I'll let them talk about whatever they want to talk about. And then let's see, I don't usually just start with my own fantasies, because I don't think that's particularly interesting to somebody unless they say that that's what they want. And every once in a while somebody will say, tell me the last time you were really excited about a sexual experience you had. And then I'll jog my memory and pull up some story that I think they'll find interesting or fun. But usually it's more me asking them where they're coming from and what they're interested in and what they're looking for, and then I'll go from there. Often people want me to play their wives, like their actual wives, because that's where their erotic attachments are, but maybe their wife doesn't do something that they are interested in. Maybe they're interested in spanking, but their wife doesn't want to spank them. And so they'll call me and they'll have me pretend to be their wife. And sometimes it's they want me to spank them as if I'm their wife. And sometimes it's that they want to talk to me about how do I ask her to do this. And so we'll role play even just pretending, or I should say we'll role play them bringing up their desires and what they want, and they'll practice asking for what they want. Sometimes people want to fight with me, like they had some fight with their girlfriend that's unresolved, and they can't have the fight that they want, and so they'll tell me what they're fighting about, and we'll get in a fight. That's kind of fun too.
So really, it's just not. While it's heavily sexual, it's not just pure sex. You're talking about literally every type of relationship dynamic that can be.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so they'll often talk to me about the relationships that they're in. They'll talk to me about what's really working for them. They'll talk to me about how they really want something, but they can't ask for it. Or sometimes they'll even say that they don't want to ask for what they want because they know their spouses will give it to them, but they won't really be into it. And that's not what they want. So they, talk to me about it.
Interesting. Interesting. So you're
Hmm.
comfortable with them if on the other side of the phone, let's just say engaged in singular sexual activity. In fact, while the conversation's going on, is
Oh,
that
yeah,
part
I
of
like
them?
that.
Okay.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
I love hearing people come. So
Hmm.
that's fun for me.
Oh, cool. Okay. I mean, again, this is
Yeah.
uncharted territory for a lot of folks. So they just don't know what percentage, if you will, of the conversations you have. I don't even know if this is a fair question, but are people projecting into, when I say sexual roles, gender boundaries, things like that, are, there's not much, by the way,
Hmm.
that's considered taboo anymore. There just isn't.
Hmm.
I don't think, but
Hmm.
I'm sure we'll find something in the conversation. But it clearly, gender associations are kind of the new frontier, if you will, in the American
Right.
culture. How often is that part of it? And have you seen that even change as there's continued acceptance towards people who are either gender neutral or amorphous or, again, fill in the blank?
Yeah, non-binary or gender fluid. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of that. So there's a lot of people who are interested in wearing women's clothes, for example, or they do it and they don't want anyone to know. A lot of businessmen wear panties under their suits, more than you would think. uh, and,
Okay.
want somebody to tell about it. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people who a lot of men, I should say, who want to experience like femininity or they want to feel what it feels like to be a woman. But they have a lot of hangups about that, or they're uncomfortable just doing it. And so they want to be forced into it. So there's a whole genre called forced feminization that a lot of people call for. So that's actually one of the things that I wasn't comfortable with when I first started this work that I've come to understand and actually really like doing. And part of the reason for that is when I first started, a lot of people have a lot of shame about that because they're taught to feel that way. And they'll say things to me like, oh, I'm wearing panties and a garter belt and nylons, and isn't that embarrassing? And um, when I first started, that was bothersome to me because I thought I wear that stuff and I don't find it embarrassing. So why do you find femininity embarrassing? Like this isn't something you should be embarrassed about. But that's so like culturally ingrained. So I spend a lot of time in the work that I do with my like sissies, they call themselves sissies, um, is affirming them. I like to affirm them and say, no, actually, you look really beautiful, and allow them to feel like beautiful and seen. I really like walking people through dressing up. Like I want to hear them pull their nylons up and get dressed and go through this transformation where they go from like their everyday life to feeling beautiful or sexy or feminine or things that they don't feel like they have access to typically. So yeah, there's a lot of that. And then there's people who just want to talk about their own like sexuality. They want to talk about like coming out as gay or as non-binary or as whatever it is that they're trying to work through. And the sort of anonymity that you get in phone sex because you can talk about whatever you want and hide as much information about yourself as you want to. I think it's a very safe space to play out new roles.
Now, do you only do this over the phone, or is there a live cam element to it, a live camera element to it?
Yeah, I mean I do both. Yeah, so on Night Flirt, but then also on some of the other platforms as well. You can do just phone, or you could do phone and camming, and usually we'll just like run that through Skype or something. So, although you're not supposed to do that on Skype, but there's not a ton
Shh,
of options.
we won't tell anyone. Um,
Yeah. So you can also do one-on-one sort of Skype shows.
now you touched there on the technology. I mean, the technology for this is now astonishing. I mean, Just even, let's just talk about the conversation we're having right now. I mean, you're in a different part of the country, a real-time, high-quality resolution image with without lag and with having a conversation without lag by two folks who are entrepreneurs in their respective business environments. I mean, that wasn't conceivable 5 years ago.
Right.
It couldn't happen for me to do what I did doing right now. I needed a television studio. I don't anymore.
Right.
I would imagine you professionally have to maintain some fairly expensive equipment. I mean, for this to be worthwhile for folks, how tech savvy are people now if they want to cam with you? I mean, the underlying question here is that for all the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment, the it's not happening, the societal pressures, what you're doing is a multi-billion-dollar industry, isn't it? I mean, it seems like everybody somewhere has to have engaged in this somehow at some point. I mean, there's just too much money flying around. So
Yeah.
So how when you've been doing it for a couple of years now, how are people that much more practiced? Have you seen people just much more comfortable when they call you?
I think it depends, and it depends on people's ages too. So younger people tend to be more interested in doing Skype shows too, or using the technology in that way. A lot of older people are much more interested in just like straight phone calls. There's also a texting aspect of it too, and everybody seems to use the texting. That's become something that's pretty universally used. But yeah, I mean, I think that people are much more comfortable with it. I also think that clients are becoming much more. I think that one of the things that we do now in our profession is not just stay on the platforms where we have our advertisements, but we have Twitter followings, and we have our a social media presence, and plug into sex worker rights stuff. And so a lot of my clients really follow what's happening in terms of the platforms too. So for example, I work on Sext Panther too, SEXT, Sext Panther. And Sext Panther does phone calls and picture trading and things like that. And they had a data leak recently, not of the client's information, but of our information.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's happened on a lot of the platforms. This is not, this happened with I Want Clips too. It happened with OnlyFans. So this is fairly common. It's not good, but it happens. And when that happened, some of my clients who talked to me on Sex Panther were like, I'm not really comfortable with that anymore, so I'm going to move to these other platforms. So it's not even just that they have the technology to be able to do it, but they're also keeping up with what platforms are people who do this work working on? Are those platforms safe? There's a lot of people who are into sort of data security who, follow what we're doing and where we're working from platform to platform, which is part of being an online sex worker too, is moving from platform to platform as they either leak our data or they kick us all off or there's a lot of different things that happen.
Yeah, awkward question here. So I think people, it's on the minds of everyone. Now, as we mentioned, we talked last time you were out. You're very out. I mean, you write a profile in a mid-sized city that's one of those. In one of those cities where it's a large city, but seemingly everybody knows everybody. It's
That's true.
I mean, so I guess the question is twofold. Number one, how do folks react who might not have? Well, I'll be careful when I say this. How do folks react when they're not in a position to having had to admit that they've used sex services when in fact they probably have, all right? But at the same time are looking to do judgment. And what would you ask in terms of fundamental privacy if you ran into someone, and I know it's happened to a lot of folks, you ran into someone, well, maybe not now, but at Whole Foods or something, or at Starbucks.
Yeah.
I mean, what's supposed to be the protocol there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've had this happen a couple of times. I have, I'm wearing long sleeves right now, but I have fairly prominent tattoos, and that, make that are noticeable. And one time I was at my kid's like a sports game, and some guy came up to me, and he was standing and he was looking me up and down, and he said, "Nice tattoos." And I was like, "Thank you." And then he was like hovering around like, "Oh, those are nice tattoos." And he like wouldn't get off of it. And then I realized like actually what he's trying to say is that he recognizes my tattoos and he recognizes me. Um, but wouldn't just say that. And I just pretend like I don't know what they're talking about. This is what
Right.
I normally do. Um, but I think that like as for me, like, and I know this is true of a lot of my friends too, it would be much more comfortable if out of context, like people didn't do that. I was with my husband at the hospital one time because he was sick last year, and one of the nurses came in and he was like, "Wait, I know you," and I was like, "No, I don't know you," because I don't want this so mixed up. And even though I'm very out, that doesn't mean that when I'm at my kid's sports game I want somebody to say that
Right.
they've watched me in porn or something like that. I'd rather have that a little bit separated out. But I don't know. For me personally, I would say that the protocol would be to, I think it's fine to say like, "Oh, I'm a fan of your work," but not to like hover and be really weird. Like that's enough. You could just say that and move
No,
on.
you don't have to be a creeper. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and I guess that again, adult entertainment is so ubiquitous now. Um,
Hmm.
you now face the challenge, particularly as someone who's extended themselves both in the political sense as well as the artistic sense. Anyone who's been in adult life, anyone who's been in any sort of public life, has to deal with the fact that
Hmm.
there are people out there, and I think fundamentally most of them are good people, but for a number of reasons that they have formed a relationship with you that's not real. And
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
particularly since you're engaged on a daily basis in fantasy exploration, at a certain point you may
Hmm.
begin to personify that fantasy. So how
Right.
it happens. I know a number of people who are prominent in the world of talk radio, and the Howard Stern model for years was to discuss every single aspect of your life, and I mean everything on the air.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I sat once on a flight next to a guy who was a writer, the hockey writer for a major American publication, and
Hmm.
you're expected now. And here's the challenge: whether you be someone in newspapers, audio, video, entertainment, you're expected to produce a
Right.
great deal of social media output. And that just
Yeah.
eliminates whatever barriers exist between you and your
Hmm.
private life. He says he can't go out to dinner. He's a hockey writer, so he can't go out to dinner
Yeah.
with his wife without somebody yelling across the table, "How about them? Are they going to make the Stanley Cup
Yeah.
Finals?" And
Right.
and it's just it's that's actually, they say, for a lot of folks, the most exhausting part, that
Hmm.
crumbling of that wall. So
Yeah.
I imagine, do you have a lot of repeat business, people who call you? Are you able to recognize, how do you know? I mean, if I guess the other challenge, if someone calls you and they just assume they know you, as an extension of this conversation, they know who you are.
Right.
So how do you keep track of it all, or can you keep track of it all? I mean, if you have
Yeah.
regular customers.
I have a lot of regulars, and I like those long-term relationships. I like to develop things over time. And so I would say that 80% of my business is like repeat business, people that I've worked with before.
Hmm.
And some of them I've been talking to for years, for 2, 3 years. They'll call me or text me or talk to me, and follow me on social media too. I mean, that's another thing, is that because I do a lot of writing, I'll have people who call me and want to talk about things that I've written, articles that I've done. So there's a lot of that. And I mean, the regulars, I know them. They're like people in my life. I think it's hard for people to understand this from outside of it, but these are relationships, and you build these relationships over time. And these are people that I, care about, and I want to know what's going on in their lives. So they're not hard to keep track of at all. The thing that's harder to keep track of is people who call me maybe once a year, but are like, hey, I had somebody that called me today who said that, who was like, hey, how are you? And I was like, who is this? And
Oh,
then as soon as he told me who he was, I remembered who he was. But I think that it's just like any other profession where you have colleagues and you have a lot of them, and you keep track of who they are, and if they were to call and talk to you, you would know who they are. And so I don't think that that's too difficult. I think that the point that you're making about like social media and the kind of parasociality that comes with having a one-sided relationship, because people know a lot about what's going on in your life and you don't know who they are. That's a little bit harder, and I actually find it less hard in work because work has a very has boundaries to it. But I find it hard in that I have a lot of people hit me up with relationship problems. Like
hmm
just on Twitter, I'll get a lot of messages from people who will say, "Hey, I'm having this particular issue. What am I supposed to do about it?" And I have no idea. I have no context for who they
right.
are or
Yeah.
what I'm supposed to do about their relationship problems.
Exactly, but you're an empathetic voice who's working very
Hmm.
hard to create a connection. So the rest of the baggage just keeps it coming down the hill. Now
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by people's boundaries because there's been an argument made by a lot of folks who are, if you will, opposed to pornography, opposed to adult entertainment, opposed to
Hmm.
fill in the blank, because they talk about desensitization, being desensitized. Okay, let me stumble over that.
Hmm.
The You've mentioned yourself how since you began, there are certain behaviors now that you find intriguing that you actually enjoy. So your boundaries have been expanded, and it all sounds
Right.
very positive. Do you find that some of your repeat callers over time become more extreme? Is it a function of what's
Yeah.
the next kink, the next exciting, or the next bad boy thing to do? How does that work?
Yeah, sometimes that happens. And there's some people who, I mean, this is kind of a funny anecdote too. There's sometimes people who what they get off on is pushing boundaries. So it's not even the thing itself. So I, for example, had somebody like a regular who called me, and I like him and I like talking to him, but he would always try to make things a little more extreme and a little more extreme. And I have a friend who is more into taboo stuff than I am. And so I was like, hey, you should call her. She would really be into this thing that you want to do that like is just not my thing. And he would call her, and then he kept coming back to me because I think she was like, yeah, sure, I'll do whatever you want to do. And that wasn't, you know, the fun part for him. He kind of liked the pushback. So I think that for me, I'm pretty clear about my boundaries and just won't do something if I don't want to do it. I find that less troubling. Not, I shouldn't say less troubling. That's not really what I mean. That's less hard for me to deal with than I've had long-term regulars who are really like stuck on something and they just want to replay that same thing over and over and over again. And after a year or two of the exact same fantasy, I'm like, I really just can't do this anymore. I think that's a little harder is like the repetitive, if somebody becomes really fixated on something.
So you're like the rock and roller who keeps getting the request for the greatest hit over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Right. And the trouble is, I would
Yeah.
imagine, I would imagine if you go acoustic with it or you change the words, they're probably going to be right on it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Wait a
There
minute,
was at one point I was like, I can't get pregnant anymore. Like I've been pregnant so many times. Like I just
really.
can't do it anymore. Yeah,
So
there's
so
a lot. Yeah,
so
I
so
actually.
is that like a category of people who want to impregnate you? I don't know. I mean, is that a
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah. That is a thing. And actually, I usually find it kind of fun. Like I like that. But
Hmm
when it takes like the exact same form over and over and over again, then you kind of lose the fun for it if you just are repeating the same thing over and over again. But yeah, I mean, that is a thing. People are interested in that sort of impregnation fantasies, or even just. And I mean, this is one of the fun things about phone sex that you can't necessarily do with somebody. Like if you were to hire an escort, you wouldn't have like full reign to do, you know, bareback and insemination stuff like that. You just
Hmm.
can't do for obvious reasons. But with me, like, sure, they can come wherever they want to come. You know, it doesn't matter to me.
Right.
It's all fantasy. So
Well, it's the same reason if you're a baseball fan, quite frankly, if you're a real baseball fan, you prefer to actually listen to baseball on radio. You just do. There's something about radio, the quote unquote theater of the mind, which takes
yeah,
on all sorts of ramifications, extremes, visuals that in reality, not only on the phone but in the real world, are hard to reproduce. So you can have some pretty dark
yeah.
stuff going on in your head, and at the same time knowing that there's deep down, at most people hopefully understand that there's no way ever to replicate that in the real world. You
Right.
know,
You can also do things that aren't even possible in the real world. So one of my friends is specializes in giantess stuff. So they're giantess
so explain
fantasies.
that,
And
please. What is?
yeah, so I don't do that, but I mean, I wouldn't not do it, but I just haven't done it. But the people who call her want her to, there's different ways that giantess fantasies go. Sometimes the clients get shrunk down really, really small, and the provider is a giant. And sometimes the providers just grow. And so the client is normal size, but um, the person that they're talking to has taken on really big uh, proportions. And a lot of that has to do with wanting to feel like inferior to like feminine power. But it's really interesting because they'll want to be swallowed alive, or they'll want their bodies to be used as like a dildo. They're like full body. They'll.
Mhm.
One person I interviewed one time said that she had a giantess client who wanted to brush her teeth, and so she had to ask him like, okay, but if I put you inside my mouth, like, do you want to stand in my mouth and like brush my teeth with your hands, or do you want to hold your body rigid, and do you want me to use you like a toothbrush? So, you know, those are the sorts of things that you can do in phone sex that are just like, you can't, it's not humanly possible to do that. So
Well, now, and I'm sure you've wondered about this, and there's no way to explain this or get a handle on this, but from whence does this all come? I mean, some of the stuff you're describing, it would never have occurred to me that someone, and yet it's hella important to them, so much so that they're willing to spend money and time to engage in it. So have you ever given
right.
thought, or have you ever figured out where a lot of these desires or cravings, is it really a craving in some people or a desire? Because a craving to me is more intense than a desire. What do you sense?
I ask people because I'm curious about that too. So often people will be really forthcoming about what they desire and why they think they desire it. And sometimes people will talk about, early experiences and how those kind of shaped their imagination. But oftentimes I think people just maybe they saw something that turned them on in ways that were unexpected, or sometimes people had partners who were into something and they miss that, or there's all sorts of reasons. Sometimes people like with a lot of the like domination stuff, which I would include like giantess stuff in, because oftentimes the giantess people want to be squished or used in some way that's
Mhm.
harmful to them. I mean, a lot of them are people who are really powerful in their lives, and so the subversion is to lose their power. I mean, that's true with financial domination too. So, in financial domination, people who like control their world through money, like giving away their money, is makes them feel much smaller, and they don't feel that a lot in their life. So a lot of it is like subversions of power. So people who are really into this these sorts of humiliation or domination fantasies, many of them are people who have a lot of power, and are, just want to give that up for a little bit. But then there's other people who are working through their own feelings of self-worth, that, and it helps me to know like why they're coming at it. So, there's I have somebody that I'm working with right now, for example, who, like, I'm making him send me affirmations about himself because he will say that he's, not desirable or not attractive. So I have him on like a self-affirmation plan. So that's very different than what I would do with somebody who just wants to like give up their power for a little while. And then I wouldn't put that person on an affirmation plan. I instead will talk about, like, I don't know, making them get on their hands and knees in front of me and submitting to me. So it just depends on like what they're trying to get out of the experiences.
Folks, if you're just joining us, Jessie Sage is on the line. She's a repeat offender here at the Coalition. This is sort of an inaugural After Dark version of Coalition After Dark, trying to have conversations about relationships, people, sexuality, sexual politics, not in the thoroughly political sense, as in Congress or Senate or, God forbid, the president, but really the politics that emerge in a bedroom, the politics that emerge behind closed doors, or in this case, the politics which is really a conversation of interrelationship, and not so much someone choosing whether they're conservative or liberal or whatever, but really the back and forth, the negotiations, the silent negotiations that occur in forms of human sexuality. This is the Coalition. We will only do this show on coalitionradionetwork.com. Sadly, there are a number of, this is definitely a not safe for work conversation. Not prurient per se, but we're gonna engage in conversations about issues, performances, acts that sadly the Facebook and a few other places don't encourage. So coalitionradionetwork.com is where you can find this, and as well as on our Periscope account. Power exchange is a very complicated issue, and it strikes me that well, first of all, I mean, is it fair to say that the very act of, say, me calling you and exchanging money, is that essentially a power exchange in and of itself? And how often do power exchanges take place in a lot of your conversations?
I wouldn't say that it's a power exchange. I know that that's what, second wave feminists have often said, is that, just by doing that, the buyers, as the ones with money, are like in control of the situation. And then there's also people on the other end who will say that, just taking money for your sort of emotional labor is in itself like a empowering act. I don't know that I fall on either side of, I don't know that that's always true on either end. No, I don't think that it always is. I feel like in the way that I do my work, a lot of the people who call me, some of them are into power exchange. I mean, a fair number are, but I also want to say that there's a lot of people who just feel, lonely and want to have somebody keep them company. And those I wouldn't consider, even though money is exchanged, like it's just a service. And it's a service that's intimate, and it's a service that's like emotional and relational, but I don't know that I would consider those to be power exchanges. Although, I mean, you could argue that there's always power involved in in any sort of relational dynamic, but yeah, I think that power exchange is, though, all that being said, there is a lot of that takes place in these sorts of transactional relationships. And I think that's kind of one of the fun things about this, is that the fact that in sex work all of these interactions are so bounded. There's a start time and there's an end time to it, and for the most part, people are pretty good at keeping boundaries and understanding that I have a life that's I'm not their 124/7 like girlfriend, but I just step into these roles sometimes. The fact that there's already these like bounds, I think, means, at least for me, that you can kind of play with things and play with these power exchanges more than you necessarily would in higher stakes relationships. So these are low stakes relationships. And what I mean by that is, this isn't your spouse. I'm not actually like anybody's spouse, or, our interactions aren't going to impact their day-to-day lives. I mean, hopefully I have some sort of impact on people, and, they think about, positively about the things that we experience together. But it's not going to have you know big impact outside of those exchanges. So I think that you can then do things that push people's boundaries, that push them to think about things in a new way, or experience them, or understand themselves maybe outside of their everyday roles that they have to play, because we all have to play roles in our life. So one of the fun things about hiring somebody to role play with you, or to have any sort of sexual exchange with you, is that you get to do it differently than you do in your day-to-day life.
With all of us being under quarantine, have you seen business increase? Are more people calling you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I was thinking about that today. At the very beginning, it was less, and that made sense, I think, because people were really stressed economically and they weren't sure what was going on with their jobs. And a lot of people are at home with their families, so they have much less privacy. So it was a little bit less at the beginning. I think that seems to be changing, though. I think that people are now realizing that, they're still in quarantine and they're either a little stir crazy, or they're lonely, or they're bored. And so it's up, for me at least, I can't make generalizations, but for me it's upticking a little bit right now. And it's also a little bit different. So I have more people who are texting than calling, and I think that has to do with like privacy issues too.
Mm-hmm.
So not having not having any space to make phone calls.
Now, for a significant part of the professional adult entertainment world, I mean, a huge percent of it found itself literally being shut down overnight. It simply largely ceased to exist. I mean, here in Providence, Rhode Island, we are Sin City. I would argue that there are more ways to sin and more places to sin during normal times than possibly anywhere in America, and I'm including Las Vegas. I'm just going to lay that out to you.
Wow.
If you guys happen to ever make it out to Providence, it's impressive. We're the bachelor party capital of New England. We are, in a sense, a gigantic red light zone here for the rest of New England. It's wow. There is a fetish flea market that takes place every year.
Wow.
When I tell you, it's hard to define how big this hotel is, but it's a Crown Plaza. Next time we talk, I'll know how many beds are there, that they shut down for the weekend for the sole use of folks who are attending this fetish flea market. And that's because of two reasons. Number one, just the sheer number of people. There are hundreds of rooms in this hotel. And number two, because one of the great scheduling moves of all time, a few years ago, back when it used to be at the Rhode Island Convention Center, the same weekend Disney on Ice was performing, and it was a magical moment. Mommy, Daddy, why is that man wearing fill in the blank?
Right.
And it was so you've got this huge economy based on this. Again, we don't know the numbers because so many of it is been sublimated, pushed fairly underground. Although, with the exception of in-person contact, almost all of it's legal. So, have you found a great influx of folks who were sex workers, perhaps escorts and things like that, trying to do this I say this with a great deal of empathy, out of desperation. And are they? And this to me is a more intriguing question. Are they easily translatable skills? I mean, it's to have a conversation is a very difficult thing for particularly a lot of very young people these days. And everything you talk about doing is rooted in your ability to have a conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think that it's been really difficult. So, it's been difficult for everybody. So there's an influx of people who are doing in-person work, so stripping and escorting and like in-person dominatrix stuff. They're all trying to pivot and move. Not everyone. Some people have just said they're not going to do it because it's not the same. But there's been a huge influx of those folks into the online spaces. And I should say that there's also been a huge influx of people who are out of their like non-sex workers who are out of work because they work in the service sector, they're doing non-essential jobs, and so they've been laid off. And many of them are also trying to get into online sex work. And so the market is pretty oversaturated. It was already oversaturated, and now it's like particularly oversaturated. And I think I've just been watching, and a lot of people are really struggling, and the business model is different. So I think that there's one of the things that people are struggling with is, and this is true especially for like OnlyFans. So there's a huge influx of people who are trying to create OnlyFans accounts, and I also have an OnlyFans account, so like I pay attention to what's going on here.
Well,
And
explain to what an OnlyFans account is to folks who
yeah,
have never
so
been there.
yeah, so it's a subscription site, and it's looks like social media, so it looks like a Facebook or something like that would look. But people can either have a free account and then get tips for the content they put, or they can have somebody mine, for example, is set up so people have to pay $5 a month to see the content that's on my feed. And on top of that, like they can pay for other things there. They can, buy custom videos or audios or pictures or things like that. And on every single post, you can tip. So people, would put up a lot of the content that they would put up on Twitter, but this is a way of monetizing that. So there's been a huge influx of people who've gone onto OnlyFans, because right now OnlyFans is the place that has the most traffic for those sorts of subscription sites. And what I've been seeing is that, first of all, there's like the technology issue that you were talking about. So a lot of people who were doing in-person work, obviously, like they don't necessarily have all of the camera equipment and the lighting equipment, everything that you need to make good digital content. But also there's, you have to do a lot more work. Like the transactions themselves make less money. And so I think that that's frustrating for a lot of people, dancers who are like, I can't make as much money canning as I could if I went into the club, so
Right.
adjusting to the amount of work that you have to put in for not even close to the same amount of money, I think is a big shock for people. And I also think that like this is a business that's set up on having a large following and a large social media presence. So because you don't make as much per transaction, you need to have a bigger fan base. If you to try to make a full-time living on online sex work, you have to have a pretty big fan base. So that's something that you don't build, overnight. So I think that's one of the big issues is that for people who are having to like completely pivot their business, you can't do that overnight and just replace the income that you've lost in your in-person services. So I think that's really hard. But I agree with you. Like if that's a totally reasonable thing to do. Every industry is doing that. People
Right.
who have moved their work home, so and online as much as they possibly can.
Well, and it's a difference between dine in and take out, I guess. Bad joke.
Yeah.
But you're talking about morphing in a sense from being an entertainer to being a business person, because I know from our conversations that you and your husband have a considerable investment in equipment because of your video business, because of your podcast, because of your writing work. I mean, this is not a dalliance for you. This is not a whim. This is not something that you just lightly jump into when you're bored. This is something
Right.
that is a real commitment, just like any business. You spend the sense I get from you though is that it's a real labor of love, that you enjoy every minute of it. And that's an important distinction. Again, without going political, that you've embraced it, and that's ultimately what life is about. The video business brings up a whole nother side of it, if you will, because again, the equipment, the investment, the time. Do you find it's an extension?
The editing skills.
Well, yeah. Listen, let me tell you, we've got a small shop here, and I could tell you that the unseen part of putting something together every day is I could work 24 hours a day doing this.
Oh yeah.
It's never ending. The promotion,
Right.
Folks like you are great. You're very easy to deal with. I've been dealing with people all week in terms of, after a while you say to yourself, I come to people and I say, I'm going to give you an opportunity to publicize your business. And you'd think like, hey, great, let's just do it. No, there's the dance, and I'm assuming that you've involved other people in your production work. And so you've got all the drama of working with contractors and everything else. What, Is your work on video radically different, if you will, than your approach to that? I mean, is one function as a request of people? Is it just the folks that you've decided to do on your own because you might find it an interesting film to do?
No, so I started doing it as I started doing the video stuff as almost like as a political project, because I felt like there wasn't a lot of things that I saw in porn that I wanted to see. And so I wanted to see if there was space for me, and for the sort of things that I liked. So I very much, I don't know, I create videos that are the way that I like to have sex. And they're, for me, like the work that I do is very pleasure oriented. So, I mean, obviously it's not exactly the same, because you have to make sure that like camera angles are good, and you have to make sure that like lighting is good and things like that. And so it's not, totally organic, obviously, but I do try to create things that I think are a reflection of like my own sexuality and like what I would want to see. And that's true when I do stuff by myself. It's true when I do stuff with my husband, but I also work with some of my friends, and I try to create the same sort of like sensual vibe with them as I do like, with my partner. And so, yeah, I mean, I work to create something that I think is like sexy and I think is sensual and that I think reflects, I don't know, the way that I experience pleasure. So, but I also, but in terms of like the business of it, sometimes it's like that. And then often I'll do what we call customs, where somebody will give me their fantasy and like we create it. So usually they'll pay ahead of time for whatever it is that they want to see you do, and you'll create it. And it's usually like some improvisation. So for example, one of the ones that was really like powerful for me was somebody wrote to me and said, hey, I am a man who is feels bisexual, but I haven't really explored that. And I would love it if you and your husband did a video where you like invited me to enjoy being with both of you at the same time. And so we made him this thing that obviously just the two of us were in, but we talked to the camera as if it was him, and told him it was okay if he joined us, and told him how happy we were to have him there, and like told him what he would do. And he wrote back to us and told us that he never cried before, like while he was watching something, and the whole thing made him cry because he felt very seen. So like that was amazing. And I really like doing that. Like I like to give people something that they feel like they can't have otherwise, right, or they're not ready for yet. That's the other thing too, is I think fantasy is a way of working up to something that you want, but you're afraid to access like in your real life or in your current life. So yeah, I mean, that's how I approach that, how I approach our, video side of it.
I know I'm intrigued by that, because there was I guess when I use first wave, second wave terms, I don't want to confuse it with the politics of feminism, but there was a wave, if you will, late 70s, early 80s of quote unquote women's pornography. And it was very, a lot of soft music and gauzy cameras and I just and it was a lot different from anything that had ever been introduced before. But it was a milieu. It was very much approach to filming, as opposed to
Yeah.
something that you're talking about. So when you talk about your sensibility and what you enjoy, it has less to do with the fact that you're a woman, has more to do with your personal choices. So I
Yeah.
mean, so maybe you could elaborate on that. Give a sense of that. What are your personal choices? What do you want to see on film?
What do I want to see? I want to see. Now I'm gonna be shy. No, I think that I want to see a lot of yeah, I guess I'm not going to contradict what you were saying a little bit earlier, because I feel like a lot of my own like interest has to do with like female centered pleasure, like women centered pleasure. So I like to see, I don't know, I like to see cunnilingus. I like to see like fisting because I find that really erotic. I Squirting is interesting to me. Like I think anything where like I don't know. I feel like a sense of like letting go. That's very sexy to me. So all of those things kind of fit in that
Hmm.
framework, I think. I like makeout videos too. So I think just like sensual kissing is very sexy, and I've created a lot of videos that are just kissing, and I like that. I like doing those. Um, yeah, I think that I just kind of like a kind of sensual, slow, like eroticism. That
Hmm.
seems, which isn't. I don't want to give the impression that I think that I'm doing anything new. Like nothing. It's nothing new. It's just the way that I like to work.
Right.
It's
What
nothing new or radical. It's just how I like to work.
so when you're doing customs, as you call them, for other people, what are some of the subjects, other subjects you've covered there? What are, what is it that people
Hmm.
have been seeing? Again, it's an oral sense versus a pure video sense. Again, you got the limitations you talked about with some of the more
Hmm.
extreme things, but what are some of the things people have requested for you in terms of custom?
Yeah, so that one that I just told you, I remember doing one where somebody was a foot fetishist, and he wanted a foot job, but he wanted to pretend that he was just watching, and that like I brought his best friend in. So it was this whole like role play about how we used to have sex, but he didn't satisfy me, so I brought like his friend in and made him watch. And but it was very like foot oriented. So I remember doing that. That was actually very fun. There A lot of stuff about like uh desire for other men. So I mean, one of the things that has been the most interesting for me since I started this work is that so many of the fantasies of my clients have been based around wanting to experience like sexuality with other men, um, and wanting to feel like that was okay. So I talk like a lot of men through that, but that comes across in like custom requests too. So
Hmm.
um even though the video that we're creating is like ostensibly like a straight video because it's me and like a man, like the um dialogue around it and everything has to do with more like male bisexuality. So I get some requests for that. And then just some straight like masturbation stuff, like I want you to masturbate with a dildo or not with a dildo, or with your fingers, or
Hmm.
squeeze your boobs, or some of it is just like what visually they want to see, like you know do a little dance and squeeze your boobs, and then do that, just stuff like that.
And what is what's a sense of what does it cost an individual? And I realize probably the more involved it is, the more expensive. But is that an expensive thing to do to create a custom video like that?
So I charge $10 a minute. So if there's a 10-minute clip, I say like I need $100 to make it. But then with the condition that like I can still sell it on my stores. So if it's exclusive and they only want like they want to be the only ones to have it, then it's more expensive. But if it's just that they're like fronting me and giving me an idea and then I can go take that and sell it elsewhere, then it's usually like $10 a minute, which I think is a pretty standard rate.
Wow.
I do custom audios too, and that's really fun. I like doing that. So people will say they want, one time I did one with a friend of mine where the guy was really into the idea of like 100-person orgy, but he wanted us to like go through what everybody in the room is doing. So we got in the sound booth and we were like, oh my gosh, look over there. These people are doing this. And look over there. These people are doing this. And we just described, 50 different sex acts. That was the whole thing. So,
well, I mean, for how many people hearing someone just literally say all the things that they can't complete a sentence on, I mean, you're really getting into people's head at that point. Which is I would imagine the goal. You're
right.
You're involved with them at a completely different level. It's and it's not just the anonymous, anonymous just kind of run of the mill, 1990s porn. I mean, it's actually geared towards giving voice to everything that they can't. And
right.
No, I mean it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. I love that audio work for that reason, because it's really, I like bringing somebody's like fantasy to life and then giving it to them and letting them like in their own, space, listen to it. I think it can be really, really powerful.
So folks right now, if I'm sensing your recommendation is, despite how crazy the world is right now, and it's insane. I mean, I'm a lot older than you, and I have, this is, in fact, if there's anything, what this current experience represents is what makes it even more challenging is that no one's been through this in pretty much anyone alive. No one, I doubt there's anyone survivors of the great 1918 flu epidemic. So this is uncharted territory for everyone. So in a moment of great tension, there's fear, there's this crazy mix of emotions out there. People feel like in a lot of ways they have less control over their lives than ever. People who are looking to say adults, as if I'm an adult, right? But as you've got to know me, sorry, I'm the wrong person to come to. If you're looking for emotional maturity, not happening. But ultimately, the people that we look to for advice have either A, incapable of giving it because we're all to a large degree in the same boat, or B, if they were people in government or connected areas, they've failed us so miserably in the first few months of this that there's a seeking. So, to what degree can people engage in some really fundamental escapism through the world that you're part of? I mean, how therapeutic and how much just fun could it be?
I think it can be a lot of fun and very therapeutic, both of those things. I mean, I think that being able to step outside of your own circumstances and your stress and entering into a fantasy world can be really cathartic, I think, too. And also, I think people are playing out a lot of their like anxieties. So I've talked to people who want to talk about being infected and what that would feel like, or being in quarantine, or actually playing out the sort of anxieties that they have. And I think, but then also on the flip side of that, people who said like, don't talk about what's going on with COVID. Let's just have some fun as if it wasn't happening. And I think being able to step outside of that and experience something different and open up your world a little bit, especially when our worlds are so small. Like most of us are, in our houses and aren't leaving. And so we're in very small spaces and our worlds are really small, and being able to call someone or interact with someone on cam or text with somebody who can open up your world a little bit and give you a different sort of experience than the one that you can have within the walls of your house, I think can be really powerful.
It's great stuff. I mean, you've really opened our eyes this evening. This is going to be the first of hopefully many conversations we have. I mean, there's really unlimited conversation about the subject because it's so important. It's so part of everyone's lives, whether they admit it or not. I think for purpose of this show and this little network that we're building here, it's we all need to get past that point where we're pretending to be purer than the driven snow, if you will. There's just too many. I mean, if you look at a list of the most popular sites in America, I don't know which. I think it was Pornhub or one of them was right up there with Drudge in the New York Times, and that was before this craziness. I'm thinking that when the new rankings come out, there might be a decided flip. How can folks get in touch with you? You are, as we've mentioned before, you occupy a variety of mediums. There seems to be no limit to the different ways that you're approaching this. But you said your first and favorite was phone sex. So how can folks find you there?
You can find me on Night Flirt. Just look up Jessie Sage. If you go to Night Flirt, it's easy to find me. I'm Jessie Sage. Sex Panther, you can also find me there as Jessie Sage. Those are the 2 places I do phone sex. So, yeah.
And then there's your OnlyFans site.
And I have an OnlyFans, and that's actually my Twitter handle. So it's onlyfans.com/sapiotextual. And you can also find me on Twitter there too at sapiotextual. And I'm on Instagram as Curvaceous Sage, and it's pretty easy to find me. I'm lots of places.
Right. And by the way, the tease is the next time we get together, we're going to talk about the term sapiotextual. Okay, that's that's a whole nother show in and of itself. It's a whole nother conversation.
You think so?
Well, the point is that I think you've been wonderful tonight. I mean, it's just the somehow you managed to bridge that difficult gap between not being just completely prurient. It's fascinating, it's sexual, but it's mature, but yet at the same time you brought to light a lot of really interesting, concepts in terms of philosophy and people's outlook. So that's a really heady mix to have a conversation about in one night. When you start getting into group dynamics and folks' evolving sense of what is a relationship, evolving sense of what their sexual identity is. In fact, if the elimination of so many boundaries and so many borders and one concept within the space of one generation, I think you'd have to go back to Victorian England and the release from that to see such a big change. And of course, then as this situation on goes, do we find what is the unanticipated reaction as a result of just the way we redefine our society? I mean, the concept of going out there as a swinger or somebody, on the loose is pretty terrifying to most people right now, given the unseen nature, if you will. So what will that do to monogamous relationships? No idea. I'm not an expert. I just try to play one on the radio. So
I think there's so many interesting questions right now. I think that this whole pandemic is going to reshape our erotic imaginations in ways that I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I think it will.
In fact, I think the only thing we could summarize is we have no idea what anything. I mean, in a way that I don't think it happened again in the current lifespan of folks around right now. I don't think anything has been more unsure than what we're facing right now. So again, that's why I hope we continue to have more of these conversations, because again, it's fun, it's interesting, and at the same time, it's in a way you manage to bring up an element that people are uncomfortable with a lot of times, but achieve a comfort level. So congratulations for that. That's got to.
Thank you.
That's unusual. So. Let's sign off for now. I know that we're going to talk offline. I hope that there's different ways that, in terms of what you write and what you share, that can break out into a wider world right now. And I look forward to having you come on again. And again, I thank you for being the inaugural, if you will. There's some really bad analogies I
Well,
could come up
thank
with. I won't. I'll spare you. But thank you for being our inaugural participant. How about that in the
Okay.
Coalition After Dark? I hope you had fun.
I did. I did have fun. Thank you for having me.
All right, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free. And tonight, in breaking new boundary, we are the Coalition After Dark. Civilly disobedient media, but at the same time having conversations that I think are very important to people right now. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. We will be replaying this on coalitionnetwork.com. We've got the technology that we can schedule some replays at appropriate times. And but at the same time, I walk away from this conversation thinking that really I would say that the age limitation on this should be just anyone who's really reached a level of maturity. I don't think there's anything we talked about tonight that shouldn't be the subject of a conversation between people who are in adulthood or even, have just entered adulthood. So I thank you very much. And Jessie Sage, have a wonderful night, and let's talk soon.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.